For centuries, a silent watch has been kept over our world, not by gods or spirits, but by eyes from beyond the stars. Imagine it, cosmic observers, with technology and lifespans that dwarf our own, looking down on humanity as if we were a fascinating, chaotic ant farm. They've been here since the dawn of our civilizations, quietly documenting our every move. They saw the rise and fall of empires. They watched the pyramids being built, piece by monumental piece. They witnessed the legions of Rome march across continents, the great walls of China rise to guard its borders, and the Viking longships slice through the North Sea. Through it all, they gathered data, cataloging our progress and our peculiarities. They listened to our greatest philosophers debate the meaning of life, and our poets weave words of love and loss. They saw our art, our music, our incredible capacity for creation and beauty. They must have been impressed, at least for a while. But their observations didn't stop at our achievements. They also saw our darkest moments. They recorded every war, every conflict, every act of senseless violence. They charted the lines of battle, from the clash of bronze swords to the devastating flash of atomic bombs. They saw brothers turn against brothers, nations devour nations. They watched us repeat the same mistakes over and over, trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of conflict. The data streams would have been filled with the sounds of our cries, the smoke from our burning cities. And it wasn't just the large-scale conflicts. Their instruments were sensitive enough to see the smaller, more personal tragedies. They observed the insidious spread of greed, how the desire for more could corrupt the kindest of hearts. They watched as societies were built on inequality, where a few prospered at the expense of many. They saw the chaos of our systems, the short-sightedness of our decisions, the way we so often prioritized immediate gain over long-term survival. They watched us pollute our own planet, poison our own waters, and tear down the very ecosystems that sustain us. Imagine the confusion of these ancient, logical beings. They saw a species with the intelligence to split the atom and map the genome. Yet, a species that couldn't seem to figure out how to live peacefully with itself. A species capable of profound love and compassion, yet equally capable of unimaginable cruelty and hatred. We were a paradox, a walking contradiction, brilliant and foolish, creative and destructive, all at the same time. How could one species contain such extremes? So, after centuries, maybe even millennia, of this relentless observation, the time finally came to compile their findings. Picture a council of these alien beings, gathering in some sterile, otherworldly chamber. They sift through mountains of data, our history, our art, our science, our wars. They analyze every trend, every pattern. They debate and deliberate, trying to make sense of this strange, volatile species called humanity. What would be their final conclusion? What single, concise summary could possibly capture the entirety of our existence? After all the analysis, after witnessing our greatest triumphs and our most profound failures. Their final report was dispatched back to their home world. It was a message that had taken centuries to compose, but it was incredibly simple. Just 3 words, containing the weight of all they had seen. The report read, "Humans are unstable." Is that it? Is that all we are to the cosmos? A chaotic, unpredictable blip in the universe? Maybe. But here's the thing they might have missed. Our instability is also our greatest strength. It's the source of our innovation, our art, our ability to change and adapt. We are not a finished product. We are a work in progress, constantly striving, falling, and getting back up again. Perhaps one day, if they keep watching, they'll have to add an appendix to that report. The Galactic Council, a coalition of 1,000 star systems, cast their final vote. The verdict was unanimous. Earth would not be destroyed. This wasn't an act of mercy, but one of cold, calculated logic. Destruction was wasteful, a blunt instrument for a delicate problem. No, Earth would be corrected. It began subtly. The first sign was the sky. The familiar blue deepened into a rich, impossible violet. People looked up, mesmerized, sharing photos, speculating on atmospheric phenomena. It was beautiful, ethereal. We didn't know it was the filter being installed, the first layer of the correction. Then came the silence. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of noise. The constant, grating hum of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the angry shouts in the street, they just faded, replaced by a gentle, melodic hum that seemed to resonate in your bones. It was calming, unnervingly so. Productivity soared, global anxiety levels plummeted. We called it the Great Quiet, and we celebrated it. The real changes started a week later. They called it rebound. Suddenly, vast fortunes vanished from digital accounts. Not stolen, but redistributed. A billionaire in Manhattan woke up with a modest, sustainable income, while a family in a remote village found their debts cleared and their future secured. There was no chaos, no riots. Any flicker of outrage was instantly soothed by the ever-present hum. The algorithm was perfect. It gave everyone not what they wanted, but what they needed. Need, not greed, was the new law. Art and culture were next. Museums were flooded with new works of breathtaking beauty, appearing overnight. Music streamed into our devices, compositions so complex and moving they made everything before seem primitive. But our own creations, our messy, imperfect, angry, passionate art, started to feel embarrassing, obsolete. The algorithm offered us perfection, and we, in our awe, stopped trying to create our own. Why paint a flawed human portrait when a flawless celestial landscape was a click away? The cities themselves began to transform. Polluted rivers ran crystal clear. Smog-choked air became sweet and fresh. Concrete jungles sprouted vertical gardens that bloomed with alien flora, their bioluminescent petals lighting up the night. It was a utopia, a paradise handed to us. We didn't lift a finger. We didn't have to. The final phase was the connection, a subtle neurological interface delivered through the very air we breathed, the water we drank. It didn't control our thoughts, not directly, it just smoothed them. It sanded down the rough edges of human emotion. Deep grief, fiery passion, crippling despair, soaring ambition, all were gently dialed back to a manageable, placid baseline. There was no more suffering. But there was also no more profound joy. We live now in a perfect world. There is no war, no poverty, no pollution. We are healthy, we are safe, we are content. But when I look up at that violet sky, I sometimes try to remember what it was like to feel the sharp, painful sting of a broken heart, or the wild, chaotic rush of a new idea. I try to remember the beautiful, terrible mess we once were. The Galactic Council watches, pleased with their work. They didn't destroy us. They perfected us. The Galactic Council, a coalition of 1,000 star systems, cast their final vote. The verdict was unanimous. Earth would not be destroyed. This wasn't an act of mercy, but one of cold, calculated logic. Destruction was wasteful, a blunt instrument for a delicate problem. No, Earth would be corrected. It began subtly. The first sign was the sky. The familiar blue deepened into a rich, impossible violet. People looked up, mesmerized, sharing photos, speculating on atmospheric phenomena. It was beautiful, ethereal. We didn't know it was the filter being installed, the first layer of the correction. Then came the silence. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of noise. The constant, grating hum of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the angry shouts in the street, they just faded, replaced by a gentle, melodic hum that seemed to resonate in your bones. It was calming, unnervingly so. Productivity soared, global anxiety levels plummeted. We called it the Great Quiet, and we celebrated it. The real changes started a week later. They called it rebound. Suddenly, vast fortunes vanished from digital accounts. Not stolen, but redistributed. A billionaire in Manhattan woke up with a modest, sustainable income, while a family in a remote village found their debts cleared and their future secured. There was no chaos, no riots. Any flicker of outrage was instantly soothed by the ever-present hum. The algorithm was perfect. It gave everyone not what they wanted, but what they needed. Need, not greed, was the new law. Art and culture were next. Museums were flooded with new works of breathtaking beauty, appearing overnight. Music streamed into our devices, compositions so complex and moving they made everything before seem primitive. But our own creations, our messy, imperfect, angry, passionate art, started to feel embarrassing, obsolete. The algorithm offered us perfection, and we, in our awe, stopped trying to create our own. Why paint a flawed human portrait when a flawless celestial landscape was a click away? The cities themselves began to transform. Polluted rivers ran crystal clear. Smog-choked air became sweet and fresh. Concrete jungles sprouted vertical gardens that bloomed with alien flora, their bioluminescent petals lighting up the night. It was a utopia, a paradise handed to us. We didn't lift a finger. We didn't have to. The final phase was the connection, a subtle neurological interface delivered through the very air we breathed, the water we drank. It didn't control our thoughts, not directly, it just smoothed them. It sanded down the rough edges of human emotion. Deep grief, fiery passion, crippling despair, soaring ambition, all were gently dialed back to a manageable, placid baseline. There was no more suffering, but there was also no more profound joy. We live now in a perfect world. There is no war, no poverty, no pollution. We are healthy, we are safe, we are content. But when I look up at that violet sky, I sometimes try to remember what it was like to feel the sharp, painful sting of a broken heart, or the wild, chaotic rush of a new idea. I try to remember the beautiful, terrible mess we once were. The Galactic Council watches, pleased with their work. They didn't destroy us. They perfected us. The first ships arrived without a sound, enormous obsidian teardrops hanging in the sky over every major city. We watched, we waited, we held our breath. The world's government scrambled, military forces went on high alert, and every news channel broadcasted the same silent, terrifying image. We expected invasion, demands, or at least some kind of message. What we got was silence. For hours, nothing happened. The ships just floated there, ominous and unmoving. Everyone was on edge, expecting the worst. But then, the first signal came. It wasn't a transmission or a laser beam. It was something far stranger. It started in the emergency rooms. A nurse in Tokyo noticed it first. The constant stream of ambulances had slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The waiting room, usually a chaotic mess of injuries and illnesses, was nearly empty. In London, a paramedic finished his 12-hour shift without a single emergency call. In New York, police officers on patrol reported an eerie quiet. The usual symphony of sirens that defined the city had fallen silent. It wasn't just in the big cities. All over the world, the same reports started to trickle in. Crime rates were plummeting. Domestic disputes, street fights, robberies, they were all just stopping. Up in their silent ships, the visitors, that's what we started calling them, were monitoring us. Their mission was simple: observe, assess the threat level, and prepare for first contact or subjugation, whichever was more efficient. They tapped into our communications, our surveillance systems, our global data networks, and they saw the same thing we did. The data was undeniable. Global instances of violent crime had dropped by 97% in less than a day. Hospitals were discharging patients faster than they were admitting them. People with chronic pain reported their symptoms fading. The visitors were baffled. Their initial analysis had painted a picture of a chaotic, self-destructive species, constantly at war with itself. But the data streaming in now contradicted everything. This quiet, this unprecedented peace, was the first signal. It wasn't a message from them to us. It was a message from us to them, but one we didn't even know we were sending. The aliens, the so-called advanced civilization, were utterly confused. They had prepared for every scenario: primitive resistance, nuclear war, even total surrender. They had not prepared for spontaneous, planetary-wide peace. What was happening to us? Was it a trick? A defense mechanism they'd never encountered? Or was their very presence somehow changing us? They reran their simulations, checked their sensors, and questioned their own observations. Everything confirmed the same impossible truth. Humanity, in the face of the ultimate unknown, had suddenly become well. The strangest part was, we didn't feel any different. Nobody felt like they were being controlled. There was no blissful haze or sudden enlightenment. People just stopped. The anger, the desperation, the greed that fueled so much of our society seemed to have evaporated. A man who was about to rob a convenience store suddenly felt tired and just went home. A couple in the middle of a screaming match looked at each other and started laughing at the absurdity of it all. It was a global ceasefire of the human soul, and as the days turned into weeks, the visitors remained in our skies, silent and still. They were no longer observers planning an invasion. They were now students, trying to comprehend the species that achieved in an afternoon what they couldn't in millennia. They came to conquer a world of chaos, and instead, they found a planet of inexplicable peace. And for the first time in their long history, the conquerors were afraid. Not of our weapons, but of our potential. This was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. In the heart of New York City, in a quiet, unassuming observation room, a little girl named Alara was about to change everything we thought we knew about the universe. She was just 6 years old, with eyes that held a curiosity far beyond her years. The room was sterile, filled with child psychologists and linguists, all there to understand why Alara rarely spoke. She wasn't shy or withdrawn. She was just waiting. On this particular Tuesday, Dr. Eris Thorne, a leading expert in developmental linguistics, knelt before her. He held up a colorful picture book. "Alara," he said gently, "can you tell me what this is?" He pointed to a bright yellow duck. Alara looked at the picture, then at Dr. Thorne. The room held its breath. For the first time, she opened her mouth to speak. But what came out was not the simple word duck. It was a cascade of sounds, a melody of clicks, whistles, and deep, resonant tones that had never been recorded in any human language. It was complex, structured, and utterly alien. The observers behind the one-way glass froze. Pens stopped scratching on notepads. Dr. Thorne's professional smile faltered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He had dedicated his life to the sounds humans make, and this was something else entirely. It felt ancient, profound, like listening to the birth of a star. The recording equipment, always running, captured every syllable. The linguists in the observation booth scrambled, their systems cross-referencing every known dialect, every lost tongue, every coded language ever devised. The result was always the same, no match. It wasn't a language from Earth. The cadence, the syntax had defied all terrestrial linguistic laws. It was more like mathematics set to music, a language woven from the very fabric of space-time. As Alara continued to speak, something even stranger happened. The lights in the room flickered in rhythm with her voice. The sensitive monitoring equipment began to display bizarre energy readings, patterns that looked less like sound waves and more like galactic charts. It was as if her words were not just sounds, but commands, as if she wasn't just speaking, but actively shaping the reality around her. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen energy, and a faint, shimmering light began to coalesce around her small form. Dr. Thorne, despite his scientific mind screaming at him to be rational, felt an overwhelming sense of awe. He wasn't listening to a child with a speech anomaly. He was witnessing a first contact event, happening right here in this room. But who was she contacting? Or more terrifyingly, what was she becoming? The language she spoke wasn't just older than humanity. It felt older than the Earth itself. It was the language of the cosmos, a forgotten mother tongue spoken by the stars. And this little girl from New York was its messenger. The observers were paralyzed, a mix of fear and wonder holding them captive. They were on the precipice of the greatest discovery in human history. But it came with a chilling realization. We were not alone, and we had never truly understood the universe we lived in. Alara paused, her voice falling silent. She looked at the astonished faces around her, and then, in perfect, clear English, she asked a question that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Did you understand? What she revealed next would shatter our perception of existence. This was just the beginning. The story of Alara is the story of humanity's next chapter, and it's a tale that will echo through the ages. Have you ever felt like you're feeling too much? That the world is just a constant barrage of emotions, hitting you wave after wave? One moment, it's a sharp sting of regret over something you said yesterday. The next, it's a breathtaking surge of love for a friend, a partner, or even just a beautiful sunset. It's overwhelming, isn't it? Pain, love, regret, joy, anxiety, it all just feels so intense. For a long time, I thought this meant I was getting weaker, that I was somehow less resilient than the people who came before me, who seemed so stoic and unflappable in old photographs and stories. I'd look at my grandparents' generation and think, they went through so much, yet they seemed so strong. And here I am, getting tangled up in my own feelings. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if this isn't a sign of weakness? What if it's a sign that we're evolving, becoming something deeper? Think about it. We live in an age of unprecedented connection. We're not just dealing with the emotions of our immediate family or village anymore. Through our screens, we're connected to the joys and sorrows of people across the entire globe. We see a story of triumph in a country we've never visited, and we feel a spark of that victory. We see a video of a community facing hardship, and a piece of that pain finds its way into our hearts. Our emotional landscape has expanded from a small town to a global metropolis. This constant stream of information isn't just data. It's human experience, distilled and delivered directly to us. We're reprocessing more emotional information in a single day than our ancestors might have in a month or even a year. We're not just observers, we're participants in a collective human consciousness. This shared experience is forging new neural pathways, teaching us a new kind of empathy. This isn't to say it's easy, it's exhausting. The weight of it all can be crushing. The pain feels sharper because we're more attuned to it. The regret feels heavier because we have more past interactions to replay and analyze. But the love also feels more profound. The joy feels more vibrant. We're experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion on a high-definition, surround sound scale. Maybe this is the next stage of our development. We mastered tools, we built civilizations, we conquered the physical world, and now we're turning inward, exploring the vast, uncharted territory of our own hearts and minds. We're learning to navigate this intense inner world, not by shutting it down, but by feeling our way through it. So, the next time you feel that surge of emotion, that feeling of being too much, take a breath. Don't label it as weakness. Recognize it for what it might be, a sign of depth, a sign of connection, a sign that you are a part of a species that is learning to feel on a scale never before imagined. It's a messy, beautiful, and sometimes painful process, but it's what makes us so incredibly human. For millennia, the galactic consensus had a foolproof method for assimilating new species. It was simple, elegant, and had never failed. They would arrive, introduce a seemingly harmless piece of technology, a mirror, and within a generation, the native population would become a compliant, integrated part of the consensus. The mirror was a marvel of psychoengineering. It reflected not the user's physical self, but an idealized version, a perfect being crafted from their deepest desires and societal pressures. Over time, individuals would strive to become this reflection, shedding their messy, unpredictable individuality for a streamlined, harmonious existence. Compliance was always 100%, until they came to Earth. When the first ships of the consensus, the silent, chrome monoliths of the Xylos, descended upon Earth's major cities, humanity reacted with its usual blend of panic, curiosity, and opportunism. The Xylos offered the mirrors as a gift, a tool for self-improvement. They were sleek, obsidian rectangles that hummed with a soft, inviting light. To the Xylos, it was just another Tuesday. They set up the distribution centers, explained the basic function, and then retreated to their ships to wait for the inevitable societal restructuring. They gave themselves the standard 50-year window. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. People were mesmerized. The mirrors showed them their potential. A struggling artist saw a celebrated master. A lonely office worker saw a charismatic leader surrounded by friends. A person feeling insecure about their body saw a vision of peak physical health and confidence. The world became obsessed with self-improvement. Productivity soared. Global conflicts simmered down as everyone turned their focus inward, chasing the perfect reflection staring back at them. The Xylos watched their data streams and nodded in satisfaction. The assimilation curve was tracking perfectly. But then, about 30 years in, the data started getting weird. The curve flattened. Then, it started to dip. Instead of reaching peak compliance and plateauing, human society was becoming more erratic, more unpredictable than before. The Xylos were baffled. They sent down probes, ran deeper scans, and analyzed the terabytes of data pouring in from the mirror network. What they found was something they had never encountered. In every other species, the mirror created a unified goal, a singular image of perfection that everyone aspired to. It smoothed out the wrinkles of a culture, but with humans, it was doing the opposite. It turned out, humans weren't just trying to become their reflection. They were arguing with it. They were questioning it. The artist, seeing the master, didn't just copy the style. They started asking, but is that really what I want to paint? Is that my voice, or just what success looks like? The office worker, seeing the charismatic leader, thought, do I really want all those people around me all the time? Maybe I just want one or two close friends. The person chasing physical perfection started to wonder if their happiness was tied to their appearance or something deeper. The mirror, designed to impose a singular ideal, was instead forcing billions of humans into a deep, personal philosophical debate with themselves. It was acting as a catalyst for introspection on a scale never before seen. The breaking point for the Xylos came when they intercepted a global broadcast from a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne. She stood before a crowd, a mirror in her hand. But she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at the people. For 30 years, she said, this device has shown us who we could be. A better version, a perfect version. But it made a critical mistake. It assumed perfect meant the same thing to all of us. She smiled. It showed me a version of myself that had solved the grand unified theory, but it didn't show me the joy of the struggle, the frustration of a dead end, the thrill of a tiny breakthrough. It showed me the destination, and in doing so, it made me fall in love with my journey. The crowd roared. That's when the Xylos understood. The mirror wasn't making humanity compliant. It was making them self-aware, dangerously so. For other species, the 1% of the population who resisted the mirror's allure were anomalies to be managed. For humanity, the mirror was creating a population where nearly everyone was becoming that 1%. It hadn't given them a cage. It had given them a tool to understand the very concept of a cage, and in doing so, handed them the key. The Xylos packed up their ships. On their way out of the solar system, the commander sent one last, brief message to the galactic consensus. It was a warning. Mission on Sol 3 is a failure. The mirror technology is compromised. On humans, the device does not pacify. It awakens. Avoid this species at all costs. They don't just see their reflection, they talk back to it. And as they warped away, humanity was left alone again, more chaotic, more individualistic, and more human than ever before. All thanks to a gift from the stars that was meant to destroy them. It happened on a Tuesday, not with a bang, but with a quiet, collective sigh. The world's governments didn't fall, they evaporated. One morning, we woke up, and the structures of power that had defined humanity for millennia were simply gone. There were no riots, no wars, No dramatic last stands. The news anchors just stopped broadcasting. The politicians stopped tweeting. The grand buildings of state stood empty, silent monuments to a forgotten age. For the first few days, there was an unspoken, global pause. We all held our breath, waiting for the chaos, the looting, the Mad Max dystopia we'd been promised in movies. But it never came. Instead, something strange and wonderful began to happen. The power didn't vanish. It just decentralized, flowing back to where it always belonged, the people. In my neighborhood, it started with Mrs. Gable's garden. She'd always grown more tomatoes than she could eat. Now, she set up a small cart at the end of her driveway. No prices, just a simple sign. Take what you need, leave what you can. A retired electrician down the street saw the sign and left a note, offering to fix things for a share of the produce. A young coder created a local network, a digital bulletin board where people could post needs and offer skills, food, repairs, childcare, knowledge. It all started moving, not through currency, but through community. This wasn't some grand, organized revolution. It was millions of small, spontaneous acts of cooperation. People began to talk to their neighbors again, not just about the weather, but about how to organize trash collection, how to purify water, how to care for the elderly. We discovered that the experts we had relied on were right here among us. The former city planner helped redesign the local park into a community farm. The nurse who'd been stuck in bureaucratic paperwork set up a neighborhood wellness clinic. The resistance wasn't a protest, it was creation. We stopped resisting a system and started building something new in its place. The old world was built on competition and scarcity. It told us that without its complex rules and enforcement, we would descend into savagery. But it was wrong. It turned out, the natural state of humanity wasn't conflict, it was collaboration. Power hadn't been destroyed, it had been redistributed. It was no longer a pyramid, with the few at the top and the many at the bottom. It became a network, a web of interconnected people, each a vital node. Of course, it wasn't a utopia overnight. There were disputes, there were challenges, but instead of being decided by a distant, faceless authority, they were resolved by the people they affected, through discussion and consensus. We were relearning how to be human, how to be a community. The greatest discovery wasn't that we could survive without governments, it was that we could thrive. We had been living in a cage with an open door, too afraid to step outside. Now, we were finally free. And the world we are building together is more resilient, more compassionate, and more alive than anything we left behind. For millennia, the Galactic Union had known only peace, a serene expanse of interconnected civilizations, all basking in the light of shared knowledge and mutual respect. They were the architects of galaxies, the shepherds of nascent stars. Their technology was indistinguishable from magic, their minds vast oceans of understanding. They had cataloged every known phenomenon, charted every corner of the cosmos, and in all their endless exploration, they had never encountered a single external threat. They were, for all intents and purposes, gods, and gods do not know fear. Until now. It started as a whisper, a faint anomaly, on the quantum entanglement network that bound their civilization together. A flicker, a ghost in the machine. At first it was dismissed as a sensor glitch, a statistical improbability that would correct itself. But it didn't. The anomaly grew, spreading like a virus through the very fabric of their communication systems. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was subtle, a creeping dissonance in the perfect harmony of their existence. Across 1,000 worlds, scholars and sentinels watched their instruments with growing unease. The feeling was unfamiliar. A tightening in their ethereal forms, a quickening of their energy cores. They had no word for it. In their language, the concept of threat was purely theoretical, a historical curiosity from their primitive past, like hunger or loneliness. The anomaly wasn't a ship. It wasn't an energy weapon. It was information, a signal. But unlike any signal they had ever decoded, It didn't contain data or language in any recognizable form. It contained a feeling, a raw, primal emotion that seeped into their collective consciousness. It was the shriek of a cornered animal, the terror of the hunted, the desperation of a final, hopeless stand. And then came the images. Not on screens, but projected directly into their minds. They saw glimpses of a world they didn't recognize. A small blue-green orb, teeming with a chaotic, violent species. They called themselves humans. The Union's archives had a file on them, Class 12 civilization, marked for observation only due to their extreme volatility and self-destructive tendencies. The file was flagged with a single word: avoid. The images were brutal. They showed warfare on a scale the Union couldn't comprehend. Not the clean strategic conflicts of their ancient history, but messy, visceral slaughter. They saw explosions that tore apart cities, weapons that turned living beings to ash. They saw hatred, cruelty, and a capacity for violence that was utterly alien to them. But that wasn't what terrified them. What broke through their millennia of placid godhood was the realization of why they were receiving this signal. The humans weren't broadcasting their conquests. They weren't boasting. They were sending a warning. The signal was a compilation of their history's darkest moments, a highlight reel of their own savagery. And attached to it was a simple, terrifying message. Finally decoded from the chaotic stream of emotion: we know you're out there. We see you watching. Stay away. Because we are not like you. We are not peaceful. We are not enlightened. We are a species that has clawed its way to the top of our own food chain through relentless, merciless violence. And if you come here, we will do to you what we have done to each other. We are humanity. We are the monster that hides in the dark. And for your own sake, you should be afraid of us. Across the Galactic Union, a new word was entered into the universal lexicon. It was translated from the chaotic human signal. The word was fear. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the gods of the galaxy knew what it meant to be afraid of the dark. Have you ever looked up at the vast, silent night sky and felt a strange sense of longing? A feeling that something is missing, not just out there, but in here, inside you. It's a universal human experience. We build, we create, we strive, we love, and yet there's often a persistent, quiet hum of incompletion. A sense that we are, in some fundamental way, broken. This isn't about being sad or depressed, though those feelings are valid and real. This is something deeper, a splinter in the soul that philosophers, poets, and everyday people have tried to describe for centuries. It's the gap between the person we want to be and the person we are. It's the echo of past mistakes, the shadow of future fears. It's the feeling of being a puzzle with a few crucial pieces missing. So we ask the universe, the stars, whatever we believe in, why? Why were we made like this? Why were we broken in the first place? It's a powerful question. Some ancient stories tell us we were once whole beings, perfect and complete, but were split apart, forever searching for our other half. Others suggest we were given this sense of incompletion as a gift, a divine spark of dissatisfaction that fuels our greatest achievements. Think about it. Would we have ever composed symphonies, written epic poems, or reached for the moon if we were perfectly content? This feeling of being broken is the engine of our creativity, our ambition, our empathy. Perhaps being broken isn't a defect. Maybe it's a feature. It's what allows light to get in. When we acknowledge our own cracks, our own vulnerabilities, we become more compassionate towards the cracks in others. We see their struggles not as weaknesses, but as shared human experiences. Our personal feeling of being broken is the very thing that connects us to everyone else. It's the common ground upon which we build relationships, families, and communities. We bond over our shared imperfections. And what do we do with this brokenness? We spend our lives trying to mend it. We seek knowledge. We create art, we build relationships, we search for meaning, we try to fill the void. This quest for wholeness is the story of humanity. Each of us is on a personal journey of repair. using different tools. For some, it's faith. For others, it's love, or science, or service to others. We are all kintsugi artists, taking the broken pieces of ourselves and putting them back together with gold, making ourselves more beautiful and resilient than we were before. So, the next time you feel that ache of incompletion, don't see it as a curse. See it as an invitation to connect, to create, to grow. The question isn't why are we broken? The real question is, what beautiful thing will you build with your pieces? The universe doesn't give us easy answers. It gives us a beautiful, complicated, and ultimately hopeful puzzle to solve. And maybe, just maybe, the process of putting the pieces together is the whole point. Subject Z734's file read docile, yet its species had wiped out entire planetary systems. We, the Cathar, had studied them for cycles. These humans, as they called themselves, were captured during their primitive spacefaring age. We placed them in controlled habitats, perfect replicas of their home world, to observe their notorious aggression. We expected violence, rebellion, screams of defiance. We built the enclosures to withstand it. But we got something far more unsettling. Forgiveness. It started in Sector Gamma. A human, designated Subject B12, had its daily nutrient ration stolen by another. Subject C45. Standard protocol predicted a violent confrontation. Our sensors were primed, our containment fields on standby. C45 consumed the ration, and B12 simply watched. When C45 later showed signs of remorse, gesturing with what we identified as an apology, B12 responded with a nod and a pat on the shoulder. Our translation matrices struggled. The concepts were alien, empathy, forgiveness. This wasn't an isolated incident. We engineered scenarios to provoke them. We simulated resource scarcity, introduced territorial disputes, and even staged betrayals using our own biodrones disguised as their kin. Each time, the initial flare of anger and hurt was quickly superseded by this quiet act of absolution. They would talk, they would cry, sometimes they would even separate for a time, but inevitably, they would come back together. A shared look, a simple touch, and the conflict dissolved. The data was maddening. It defied every law of predatory behavior we had ever catalogued. Our High Council was baffled. How could a species capable of such destructive warfare also possess this profound capacity for reconciliation? We had conquered galaxies based on a simple principle: dominance. The weak are purged, the strong prevail. Forgiveness was a software error, a glitch in the survival code. Yet, for humans, it seemed to be a core function. I started spending more time at the observation deck, long after my official shifts ended. I watched them build communities. They shared stories, created art from the mundane materials we provided, and supported each other through the despair we manufactured. They grieved for those who succumbed to our experiments, not with rage, but with a deep, communal sorrow that was both beautiful and terrifying. They would hold ceremonies, honoring the memory of the fallen, and in doing so, they seemed to draw strength. The terror began to creep in then. It wasn't the loud, sudden fear of an explosion, but a slow, cold dread that settled deep in our collective consciousness. We, the Cathar, were a species defined by our past. Grudges were eternal. A slight against an ancestor from 1,000 cycles ago was still grounds for war today. Our memories were prisons, locking us into endless cycles of retribution. We never forgave, we never forgot, and that was our strength, or so we thought. Looking at the humans, I started to see the flaw in our logic. Their forgiveness wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. It allowed them to move on, to heal, to unite in ways we couldn't comprehend. While we were shackled by the chains of our history, they were free. They could adapt, evolve, and become stronger after every blow. Our attempts to break them only seemed to temper their spirit. One day, the High Council ordered the final experiment, Project Chimera. We would introduce a bioagent designed to permanently sever the neural pathways responsible for empathy. we would finally make them like us. As the gas began to fill Sector Alpha, the humans didn't panic. They didn't scream or fight. They gathered together. They held hands, families embraced, and they looked up at our observation windows. They weren't looking with hatred or fear. They were looking at us with pity, and they forgave us. In that moment, watching them choose compassion in the face of annihilation, I understood. We weren't the zookeepers studying the animals. We were the prisoners, trapped in our own cage of hatred, watching the free. Their forgiveness was not for our benefit. It was for theirs. It was the key to their cage, a key we the Cathar had long ago melted down and reforged into a sword. And as the alarms on my console began to blare with anomalous energy readings from the chamber, I knew, with chilling certainty, who the truly dangerous species was. Have you ever felt like the world is rigged? Like the game is stacked against you from the start? We often hear about the 1%, that tiny sliver of the population who seem to hold all the cards. We talk about them like they're a different species, born into a world of privilege and power. We assume it's all about their DNA, their lineage, the silver spoon they were born with. But what if I told you that's the biggest lie we've ever been sold? What if the 1% isn't a bloodline? What if it's a mindset? Think about it. We see stories all the time of people who came from nothing, who faced every imaginable obstacle, and still rose to the top. And on the flip side, we see heirs to vast fortunes lose it all within a generation. If it were truly just about DNA, none of that would be possible. The rich would stay rich, the poor would stay poor, and the story would never change. But it does change, every single day, for thousands of people around the world. The secret isn't in their genes, it's in their choices. This is the great reversal, the paradigm shift that's quietly happening right now. The 1% is spreading, but not through inheritance. It's spreading through conscious, deliberate, and often difficult decisions. It's the choice to wake up an hour earlier to work on a side project instead of hitting snooze. It's the choice to read a book on finance instead of binge-watching another series. It's the choice to invest in yourself, to learn a new skill, to face your fears of failure, and try anyway. Each of these choices seems small, insignificant even, but they stack up. They compound over time. It's like building a wall, brick by brick. One brick doesn't look like much, but lay one every day, and soon you have a fortress. That's how the 1% mindset operates. It's not about one big, lucky break. It's about 1,000 small, disciplined choices. It's choosing long-term growth over short-term comfort. It's choosing education over entertainment. It's choosing to take responsibility for your life instead of blaming your circumstances. This isn't to say that genetics and background don't give some people a head start. Of course they do. But a head start doesn't guarantee you'll win the race. And starting from behind doesn't mean you're destined to lose. The real differentiator, the thing that separates those who make it from those who don't, is the willingness to make the choices that others won't. It's the decision to adopt a new way of thinking. So, how does this spread? It spreads when one person decides to break the cycle, when they choose discipline over distraction, when they choose to learn from their mistakes instead of being defeated by them. Then, someone else sees their success, not the fancy car or the big house, but the glow of purpose in their eyes, the confidence in their step, and they get curious. They ask, "How did you do it?" And the answer isn't, "I got lucky," or "I was born this way." The answer is, "I made a choice." And that's how the idea spreads. Not through a virus, not through a bloodline, but through inspiration. Through one person showing another what is possible when you decide to take control. This isn't about becoming a billionaire. It's about becoming the best version of yourself. It's about unlocking your own potential, on your own terms. The 1% isn't an exclusive club you have to be born into. For centuries, the Xylos watched us from the silent darkness between the stars. They observed our wars, our pollution, our seemingly endless cycle of self-destruction. They saw our art, our moments of breathtaking kindness, and our relentless curiosity. But they dismissed these as mere anomalies, statistical outliers, and a species defined by its flaws. To them, humanity was a failed experiment, a chaotic blight upon a beautiful blue marble, destined to burn itself out. They concluded we were fundamentally broken, so they came, not as conquerors, but as caretakers, arriving in their silent city-sized vessels to correct our course. Their arrival was gentle, almost apologetic. They disabled our weapons, neutralized our power grids, and calmly explained their purpose through universal translators. We were a danger to ourselves and the galactic ecosystem. They were here to manage us, to guide us towards a more stable, less human existence. They established protectorates, enforced peace, and pruned our more destructive tendencies. Exploration was forbidden, radical innovation was discouraged. The wild, unpredictable spirit of humanity was to be tamed. For a generation, it seemed they had succeeded. The world was quiet, orderly, and sterile, but the Xylos missed something. They saw the finished product of countless other species across the galaxy, species that had reached their evolutionary peak and settled into a predictable equilibrium. They judged us by that same standard. They couldn't comprehend a species that was a perpetual work in progress. They mistook our chaotic growth for terminal illness. They saw a flawed sculpture, not the raw, unhewn block of marble that contained infinite possibilities. The first hint of their error came not from a rebellion or an uprising, but from a child's toy. In a quiet sector, a young girl, bored with the sanitized, pre-approved toys provided by the Xylos, started tinkering. She took apart the simple mechanisms and, with an intuitive genius that defied all Xylan logic, reassembled them into something new. A tiny, self-replicating device that drew ambient energy from the air. It was useless, a trinket, but it was impossible. According to Xylan physics, it shouldn't exist. When they investigated, they found more. Everywhere. In isolated labs, scientists were sketching out theories of multidimensional travel on napkins. In garages, mechanics were cobbling together engines that bent space-time. Artists were composing symphonies that resonated with the very fabric of the cosmos, creating patterns the Xylos sensors couldn't explain. We weren't just breaking their rules. We were breaking the rules of their reality. The Xylos had seen our flaws, our anger, our greed, but they'd failed to understand that these weren't defects. They were the friction that generated the spark. Our conflicts fueled our innovation. Our fear drove our courage. Our suffering birthed our compassion. Our every failing was a stepping stone, a lesson learned on an evolutionary journey that wasn't just about survival, but about transcendence. We weren't a broken species. We were an unfinished one. We were a species on the verge of becoming something they couldn't possibly imagine. The truth dawned on them with a chilling cosmic terror. They hadn't come to cage a monster. They had stumbled into the nursery of gods, and their attempts to fix us, to calm our chaos, had been like trying to stop a supernova by smothering it with a blanket. They had only delayed the inevitable, and in doing so, perhaps made the final eruption even more spectacular. They discovered the truth far too late. Humanity was never flawed. It was just getting started. And now, the universe was about to find out what we would become. It was a cold, late autumn day in November 1793, at the height of the French Revolution's reign of terror. The National Convention, the governing body of France, had been busy. For months, they had been signing death warrants, sending thousands to the guillotine. Priests, aristocrats, political opponents, anyone deemed an enemy of the revolution faced a swift and brutal end. The council was a machine of judgment, seemingly untouchable in its power. But on this particular day, something shifted. The air in the chamber was thick with a new kind of tension, a nervous energy that had been building for weeks. The Jacobin, the radical faction led by Maximilien Robespierre, had consolidated their power, but in doing so, they had created an atmosphere of paranoia. No one felt safe. Every whisper could be treason, every glance a condemnation. A proposal was brought to the floor. It wasn't about a suspected royalist or a rebellious province. It was about them, the very members of the convention. The proposal was to suspend their own parliamentary immunity. This meant any member could be arrested and tried without the consent of the convention itself. It was a move that would strip them of their last shield against the very terror they had unleashed. Imagine the scene. These were men who had ordered the deaths of countless others, who had reshaped a nation through bloodshed. Now, they were being asked to place their own necks on the line. The debate was fierce, but short. Fear was a powerful motivator. To argue against the proposal was to look guilty, to seem as though you had something to hide. Who would dare? The vote was called. Hands went up. One by one, the measure passed. In that moment, the judges of France had agreed to judge themselves. The great irony was that this act, meant to prove their revolutionary purity, would ultimately devour them. Within months, the purges began to turn inward. Georges Danton, the hero of the revolution, was one of the first major figures to fall, his immunity now meaningless. He stood before the revolutionary tribunal and famously declared, "The revolution devours its children." He was right. The terror escalated. Robespierre, the architect of this system, grew even more powerful, but also more paranoid. He saw enemies everywhere, even among his closest allies. The very law that was meant to streamline justice now made everyone a target. Members of the convention lived in constant fear, sleeping with pistols by their bedsides, never knowing if they would be arrested in the middle of the night. The climax came in July 1794. Fearing they were next on Robespierre's list, a group of deputies conspired against him. In a dramatic session, they shouted him down, refusing to let him speak. When he was finally arrested, his own law, the one that had stripped away immunity, was used against him. There was no lengthy trial. Robespierre, the incorruptible, was sent to the guillotine, along with his key supporters. The council had voted on themselves, and in the end, the judgment was death. Their decision to sacrifice their own protection became the mechanism of their downfall, a chilling reminder that revolutionary fire, once lit, can burn even those who hold the torch. Earth wasn't saved by weapons, or technology, or some grand, heroic sacrifice we'd all seen in the movies. No, when the universe finally came knocking, our salvation was something far quieter, far more profound. It was a 1% change. For centuries, we looked to the stars, half in wonder, half in fear. We imagined grand fleets, devastating laser beams, and epic battles for survival. We built bigger ships, smarter AI, and more powerful defenses, all in preparation for a war we were certain was coming. And then, they arrived. They weren't conquerors in the way we understood them. They didn't want our water, our resources, or our planet. They were something else entirely, harvesters of consciousness. They moved from world to world, absorbing the collective intelligence, the art, the memories, the very essence of a species, leaving behind empty husks of civilizations. They saw us as just another crop, ripe for the picking. Our weapons were useless. Our technology was a toy. Panic swept across the globe as the silent, shimmering ships descended. They didn't attack. They simply began to absorb. People felt their thoughts becoming distant, their memories fading like old photographs. Despair was absolute. This was it, the end of humanity. But then, something unexpected happened. It started with a handful of people, a musician in Tokyo, a scientist in Nairobi, a teacher in a small town in Chile. As the alien field washed over them, instead of their consciousness being pulled away, it pushed back. It wasn't an act of aggression, it was an act of creation. The musician didn't just remember a melody, she composed a new one in her mind, a symphony of defiance and hope. The scientist didn't just recall a formula, he envisioned a new branch of physics. The teacher didn't just hold on to her students' names. She felt an overwhelming wave of empathy, a connection so deep it became a shield. This was the 1% change. For millions of years, human DNA had been evolving, and somewhere along the way, a tiny, seemingly dormant switch had been installed. A switch that, when faced with total psychic annihilation, didn't just defend it, created. Our consciousness wasn't a static library to be copied. It was a dynamic, endlessly expanding engine of novelty. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the harvesters. Imagine trying to drink from a fire hose that suddenly turns into a volcano. They were trying to absorb a finite resource, but they were met with an infinite explosion of pure creativity. New ideas, new art, new emotions, new scientific principles, all generating faster than they could possibly process. Their ships flickered. Their silent hum turned into a discordant shriek. The very fabric of their being, built on consuming the past, couldn't handle a species that was actively inventing the future in real. It was like a feedback loop of pure imagination, and it overloaded their entire network. And just like that, they were gone. They retreated, not from a weapon they could understand, but from a force they couldn't even comprehend. We didn't win by fighting back. We won by creating forward. In the aftermath, humanity was different. That 1% change, once activated, remained. We became a species defined not by what we were, but by what we could become. Our capacity for empathy, innovation, and art exploded. We started solving age-old problems, not with conflict, but with collaborative creation. We turned our gaze back to the stars, not with fear, but with an invitation. We were no longer just a collection of individuals. We were a symphony of thought, a living, breathing engine of creation. The universe had never seen anything like us. We weren't the strongest, or the oldest, or the most technologically advanced, but we were the most creative. And it turns out, in the grand cosmic scheme of things, that was the only power that truly mattered. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more explorations into the what-ifs of our universe.